Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my Week 8 LCS overview, analysis, and of course at the end, well, not this time my power rankings, but a playoff picture preview here as we are in the final week of LCS action. We are in the final week of every major region in the world. It's been an absolute blast to cover the ending of the season here over the past few days. Obviously, if you're familiar with the channel, if you've seen the videos that I've been uploading recently, you'll know that I have been covering the playoff coverage that's been happening in the LPL, as well as the playoff coverage that's happening in the LCK. It is LCS time, and I could not be more excited about this. We've got a super week of action to cover. 3 days, 15 games, a little bit of a 16th one, a little bit of a tiebreaker at the end too. So if you guys are excited, let me know down in the comments section below. Before we kick off, there's a lot of games to cover, but I do want to mention up on the screen right now, you're going to see my updated schedule for the week. You will notice, if you are only a fan of my LCS content, that this video is coming out significantly earlier in the week than it typically does. That's because we've got a lot of content coming out later this week, prepping you guys for all 4 major regions playoffs. So up on the screen, you can see that not only have the LPL and LCK playoff primer videos already gone out, but you can expect one on the LCS tomorrow, and that's going to be a lot of fun. And then later this week, you're going to be getting an LEC version as well. A lot of great content coming you guys' way. I hope you are excited for it, but let's not waste too much more time. We've got a lot to cover in this week, so let's jump right into day 1. And kicking off day 1, our first game of Week 8, day 1, was Team Liquid taking on Dignitas, and a big TL win here. Not really too surprising. It's one of the best teams in the league going up against one of the worst, but this really was a throttling. The score, I don't think, does it justice how not close this game was at really any point. Really, the standout part of this game was Captain Flowers, and that should tell you all you need to know. Obviously, we all love Flowers, but the game itself wasn't particularly entertaining. While there was some good plays made overall, mostly from the top side of Team Liquid, it just overall wasn't the most action-packed game. A very, very slow, methodical win for TL. Pretty much everybody on that top side, though, played really well. Player of the game for me, it's kind of up in the air because it really was a team effort, totally. But for me, it's going to go to Bjergsen here on the Azir. I thought his positioning in those later fights were really, really solid. He really didn't make a single mistake at all throughout the game. And while Bwipo and Santorin were playing super aggro and attempting to corral the entire team, Bjergsen was doing a good job with follow-up, especially towards the back half. Even if he wasn't the most, integral to the beginning parts of the fights, I thought he was probably the most polished member of the team throughout the game. But you gotta give credit where credit's due, and Bwipo and Santorin definitely came at them. Bwipo's famous Olaf coming out here. Santorin pulls out the Skarner. Obviously, we've seen Skarner quite a bit in other regions, but it has not made its way over to North America for the most part this year, and so this is a great first time we get to see it. Bwipo throws down the challenge. He throws down the Olaf. Hoon answers with the Gnar and cannot run him over. This is a pure ego pick from Bwipo, and it absolutely works for him because he dominates the matchup here. Hoon is just simply not good enough to be able to deal with Bwipo when he's on one of his better champions. And then Skarner was actually a really big problem for this Dignitas team. He was running around, creating havoc all over the map. Skarner can do that. He's actually really good in the meta right now. I've been saying this for quite a while. If you watch my other weekly reviews for the other regions, you'll know that I think Skarner's a relatively underrated pick, especially with all the other things going on in the meta right now. And I think going into Wukong, it could be a really good matchup for Skarner. Going into Zeri, honestly, could be a phenomenal matchup for Skarner as well. So, just a lot of things that I really like for him here. But overall, top side of TL, doing really well, kind of carrying the cause here. Bot side, not so much. Not that they were bad, just they weren't that important in this game. But moving on to Dignitas, they kind of got run over here, but it's not really too surprising. This is the worst team in the league for a reason, and they're playing one of the best, arguably the most talented. They were just never going to be able to hold up. Hoon was never going to be able to accept the Olaf challenge here. XU's playing like his 5th professional game here against Santorin on the Skarner. And Blue got completely run over in the mid lane. And that's really where I want to focus my attention for Dignitas on, is Blue being my dud of the game here on the Taliyah. He made some good plays. And honestly, the macro sense of Blue, I think, has been getting better and better throughout the year. Unfortunately, the mechanics just aren't there. He just doesn't play the champion very well. He's often mispositioned. Not even just Taliyah. He's just often mispositioned and caught out. And that puts him in really, really tough situations. I'm not sure if it's the macro sense, if it's I really think I can win this, or if it's the idea of, he just isn't aware that he's so pushed up. I don't know what the problem is, but he is constantly getting caught. He has been all year, and I think at this point he's pretty much solidified himself as one of the weaker mids in North America, which is unfortunate. Going into Bjergsen's a tough matchup, but Blue certainly did not hold up in this one. He's going to get my dud of the game. Spawn and Biofrost continue to impress, even if they're not, like, super important. They played relatively even into Hansama and Core JJ, and even though those two have been, well, let's just say, not so great for the better part of this year, I still think it's a good sign to see Spawn and Bio at least holding their own for a relative bit. Obviously, Hans gets out of control in the latter half of this game, but pretty much everybody on TL gets there, so... definitely not the worst loss Dignitas has suffered all year long, but I can't really say that I was all that impressed. Outlook-wise, like, this hurts their playoff chances by a considerable amount. Obviously, bottom 3 can all still make playoffs because of the weird way that LCS works. All top 8 teams make playoffs, and bottom 3 are neck and neck. Dignitas really just has to win a single game this weekend to kind of be in the conversation, but this loss definitely doesn't help them out. Team Liquid kind of in the fight for second place right now, and that would be awesome. I believe they're actually still in the fight for first, but it's really not all that close. EG should run away with it, I believe, if they get one win. So as long as EG doesn't go 0-3 this week, TL will be fighting for second, and that's actually a really realistic goal. If TL wins out, then we're looking at a TL versus 100 Thieves matchup on day 3, which could determine second place, which would be a lot of fun to watch, but this is one step closer to that, I think, for Team Liquid. Moving on to our second game here of day 1, we definitely had some fun action here between Golden Guardians and Evil Geniuses. Evil Geniuses pick up the pretty expected win, and this, honestly, looking at the records, they may have already been locked for first place, but this for sure locks them in for first place. They are sitting so far above anybody else in the standings right now, it's actually kind of ludicrous. Good for them. Really, really happy for them. They've been in such a good spot all year long. Obviously, North American talent for them to lock that number 1 seed. I'm sure it feels pretty great, but they played a good game here against Golden Guardians, a team that, yes, is on the complete downslide right now. They haven't been able to buy a win in quite a few weeks, but at the same time, they still showed up to play today, and EG got the funny champion. Ha ha ha, Zeri's here. Hooray. They gave Danny Zeri, and he got another pentakill, and it's just what happens. It's a circle of life at this point. Danny gets the player of the game, because he completely took over this. Like, it was not even remotely close. Nobody who watched this game is going to confuse who was the main focus and the main attraction in this one. The only thing I will say about this performance is part of me feels like this isn't all Danny, and that this champion is just in certainly a state right now, especially for pro play where there's just not a lot of counterplay to this if you're a good player. But shout out Zeri. Every time she's played, she gets a pentakill, and Danny came through in the clutch, so he deserves the player of the game. He played really well, was able to take over the game on it, so I gotta give him some level of credit for it. It's just, God, I hate that champion so much. I hate watching it. I want to give credit to his teammates, though. Obviously, Inspired played a pretty good game, but I really think the 2 teammates I want to shout out are Impact and JoJo, who I think both did a really good job of setting up Danny in the late game here. Not only was Impact basically the perfect frontliner in this game, something he is, honestly, if I'm being real, has kind of struggled with at points this year. Impact has kind of had a down split, I think, overall. But JoJo was also a great secondary damage dealer, was really setting Danny up for a lot of secondary options. I also really like the build that Danny went here, the Titanic Hydra. I think is a really good call. The Black Cleaver, I think, is a really good call. Obviously, I think a lot of people are going to want to go straight damage on Zeri, but quite frankly, you do enough damage. If you get even more survivability, like especially if you're ahead, that can be an absolutely lethal way to build Zeri, and so I really like that, and it absolutely paid off in this one. Pretty much everybody on EG played well, but like I said, I wanted to shout out kind of the 3 carry roles here of Impact, JoJo, and Danny as probably the 3 players on EG that stood out the most to me from how they played here. But moving on to Golden Guardians, blah, blah, like this team's not good. There's really no other way to put it. They were never in this game, and they never really had a shot. Like, it was very similar to the game that we just talked about with TL versus Dig, where kind of everybody going into the game knew what was going to happen between these 2 teams, and it went pretty much exactly as expected. Even if Golden Guardians was kind of in it and the score doesn't necessarily make it look like it was a complete blowout, it really was never at the point where they ever felt like they had a shot at actually winning the game. It always felt like Danny was in control, and even if not, like Vulcan was doing a good job of keeping him safe. Inspired had the jungle matchup won here on the Viego versus River, even if the score doesn't necessarily indicate that. Really, there wasn't a single winning point on the map for Golden Guardians, and they just eventually bled out. Even if Ablaze Olive was trying, and I've credited Ablaze Olive, I think, a lot this year, obviously. He comes back in this week, along him and Ole both come back in this week for Leader and Prismal. I think this is the right call. This is clearly your best lineup. Whatever you want to say about Leader, I don't think he's been nearly as impactful for this team as Ablaze Olive. and Ole's definitely a better player than Prismal is right now at the very least. So I definitely think this is your best lineup of 5, at least at the moment. And Ablaze Olive comes back in here, and he tries. Like, he hits some charms on Danny. Unfortunately, Danny has Cleanse, so there's really only so much that, you know, ABO can actually do in this game, but he definitely tries. Outside of that, I think the real, like, duds of the game here, for me, it's going to go to River just because I felt like he got run over in that jungle matchup. He had no pressure. The Wukong is really the only person on the enemy team that has any sort of, like, way to disturb Danny unless Ole gets super far in, and so therefore, it's kind of on the Wukong to create that pressure here, and I just don't think he did that really at all. Not that it's entirely his fault. There's only so much you can do when that champion is the way that she is at the moment, but at the same time, at least, you know, have control in some of the jungle matchup against Inspired. He kind of got run over in that matchup. So River's going to get my dud of the game here, even if it's not, like, the worst game of all time. Very similar to what I just did for Blue. I don't think Blue had the worst game of all time in the game before this. I don't think River had the worst game of all time here. I just think Golden Guardians got bled out. Like, they were the worst team, and they just slowly lost, and somebody has to get the dud of the game, so for me, it's unfortunately gonna go to River. But I don't think anybody on this team played particularly well. Licorice has obviously been taking a huge nosedive in terms of quality in recent weeks. I think 6A and Ole do have a relatively good chemistry here, but it just did not matter. They were always going to get outskilled by Danny Vulcan, and then the Zeri Lulu. Once you get to that point, it's just completely out of control. So, outlook-wise for these two teams, Golden Guardians is technically still in a playoff spot. They're still sitting in 8th place, which is absurd. Like, them, Immortals, and Dignitas, if any of them can win, like, any games this weekend, they are pretty much confirmed for playoffs because these guys can't buy a win in the bottom 3. It's definitely going to be interesting to see if any of them can pull through on that. And then EG clinches first place here. Really happy for him. They've been the best team in North America ever since playoffs last split. Hopefully they can keep it up. I'm a little bit concerned. They definitely looked a little bit worrisome against 100 Thieves and Team Liquid in both of the games that they played, but we'll talk about that a little bit more when it comes to the grand scheme of things. As for now, EG does exactly what you want them to do, which is play hard in every single game and come to win, and they did that here with a really, really solid victory. Moving on to Game 3 here of Day 1, we had another interesting one, this time an actual battle between two upper bracket playoff teams instead of just one where you kind of know what's going to happen. We got FlyQuest taking on 100 Thieves, FlyQuest on a long losing streak, 100 Thieves on a long winning streak, and FlyQuest breaks both of them in one fail swoop. Obviously, I've been hyping up 100T for a little while now. Maybe not to the extent that some of the other analysts are, but I do like the way that they play overall, and I think their game is good. I just think oftentimes they don't close out games in the manner that I would typically like, but FlyQuest does a really good job of capitalizing on an early game punish that they make, and this game just gets so out of control, it gets to the point where FlyQuest wins. Overall, this game was kind of boring. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. It was kind of boring, but it was a good win for FlyQuest nonetheless. They looked really good in this game. I think pretty much everybody did their job. I think that's something I'm really excited to talk about. There have been some ups and downs for this FlyQuest team. Takuya has kind of always been there, but you talk about the other players that are getting a lot of credit for this team being good this year. I'm talking Jose Deodo, Johnson, Aframu. They've certainly had their ups and downs this split so far. In this game, they were definitely all on the same page, though, and I also want to give a bunch of credit to Philip in the top lane. This is someone who I was very critical of early in the split because it very much felt like he had a very narrow champion pool that he could play at a pro level, but very much feels like he's grown out of that. He's grown out of just being like, Camille or bust, into someone who is experienced enough to ban the Ornn and ban the Fiora and feel like, yeah, I'm just going to play Sejuani, like, pick the Gnar, let's go. And he did it, and he looked really good in this game. His engages were really good in the late game. The Sejuani ults are massive overall against FBI here, burning, I think, both QSS and Mikhail's on both of the bot lane members. So, huge Sejuani ults nonetheless, and then it just sets up for both Takuya and Johnson to be able to take over the game when it comes to damage. They both deserve player of the game here. They both played it very well. I'm going to give it to Johnson because those Sivir, like that Sivir damage at the end of the game was absolutely absurd, and I feel like that was really the standout of the game for me, and I thought he played really well, but you could realistically give this to Takuya, and it's just as obvious, right? He completely destroyed Abadage in lane, which we'll get to, on a matchup that, while I think is typically LeBlanc favored, she's definitely the weaker champion in the matchup, so it's, you know, kind of up in the air in that sense, but overall, both Takuya and Johnson, I thought, played it really well. Jose created an environment for all of them to be able to function without worrying about, you know, jungle pressure. Closer really didn't have any sort of pressure in this game, and Aframu did a great job of keeping everybody alive. Overall, FlyQuest just looked really, really good. One of their most cohesive games that they've had in quite a while. It's something I've been waiting to say after they kind of went on this big loss streak when they started playing good competition. Well, they jumped right back in here, playing 100 Thieves and looking really solid doing it. Moving on to 100 Thieves side, though, not great. Like, obviously, you'd been on a win streak. You had looked good up until this point, but I have expressed multiple times on this channel how I'm just not sold on 100 Thieves because they don't ever dominate. Like, they win, but they never really win. You know what I mean? Like, they're good, but not like, good. And it just kind of feels like that, where if, like, you get a team that comes in and really has a game plan and really is able to take advantage of the mistakes that someone like Closer has made consistently over the course of the season, then I really worry about this team's ability to come back in the later game. Even though they play aggressive, even though they do play fast, I just worry about their ability to come back from a deficit. And we saw that here. I do think FBI and Huhi are their best players. Well, outside of Someday, who is good, but only so much you can do on Gnar. I do think they were kind of the best players in this game, especially where they were kind of hanging on for dear life, trying to create a scenario in which Zeri could carry, but it just didn't matter. The LeBlanc was too much of a problem. The Sivir was doing significantly more damage than the Zeri with a much easier time because of the Sejuani frontline versus the Trundle Gnar. It just didn't matter. Those Sejuani ults were huge. And so 100 Thieves just got in a position where it never felt like they were in the game. My dud of the game pretty clearly is going to go to Abadage in the mid lane. Just wasn't a huge fan of how he played this game at all. Obviously, it's not a great matchup to play Azir into LeBlanc. I think overall, LeBlanc should be able to pressure Azir out of that lane, and even in the late game, I think LeBlanc should have just as much quote-unquote pressure. Obviously, teamfight pressure comes a lot more from the Azir, but LeBlanc creates so much panic around dead zones in the map, like loss of vision and fog of war, that it's really difficult for a lot of these immobile kind of carries like an Azir to actively play into a LeBlanc. It's why she's been meta for so many years, but Abadage just did nothing in this game. There's really no other way to put it. He was abused by Takoya in lane. He got out of lane, and he did absolutely nothing outside of that. 0-3-0 kind of shows that off. He wasn't involved in a single kill in the game. Obviously, Closer only involved in one. Overall, I just wasn't a huge fan of what this 100T team wanted to do. They tried their best to create an environment where Zeri could carry, but it was never going to be there. Not with Johnson, not with Takoya, not with Philip, all playing the way they played in this game. Overall, outlook-wise for these two teams, I'm not going to put the panic button on 100T. They still look all right. I definitely need to see them finish out the week strong before I start freaking out. But at the end of the day, this was not the worst loss they've experienced all year long. And just more of a testament to FlyQuest, in my opinion, who looks a lot better outlook-wise than maybe I had them just a couple of days ago. I really think this win was pretty huge for FlyQuest and puts them in a much better spot than they would have been if they did not get this. Because if they lost this game, they would have been on a 5-game losing streak, which would have been pretty astronomical towards their mental. Obviously, this game gets them back to 500, puts them right back in the position to be in upper bracket, and that's a good spot to be in. Overall, I think they played really well, and I hope they can continue this form all week. That brings us to our fourth game here of day one action, and it is the legendary matchup here in the LCS. The most historic rivalry we have, CLG versus TSM. And CLG's been the better team, so they must have won, right? No, TSM picks up a crucial win here, actually putting themselves in a pretty easy spot to get 7th place. Now, obviously, there is a world in which they can bump up to top 6, technically here with FlyQuest, but it's just super unlikely. So, with them playing each other in the last game, FlyQuest would have to lose tomorrow, and TSM would have to beat C9, both of which are very uncommon things, but TSM, big win here, and it basically secures them 7th place. That's got to feel good after, for a certain amount of the season, a good portion of the season, quite frankly, they didn't even look like they were going to make playoffs. For them to have changed up their roster so much, hit the panic button, hit the reset, Solo's into the top lane, Instinct's in at ADC, Chime is in at support. This team has gotten a lot better since then, and honestly, this roster's really not looking half bad in terms of how they've played, especially recently, and this game is a great example of that. Their difference makers are really the new players, and not only the new players, but I want to point out Solo had a phenomenal game here on the Ornn. This is just kind of what he does. He gets a call halfway through the year. Some team, their top laner flamed out, and so now that he needs to come in and save everybody, he comes in. He always does a good job. They always get better, even if it's not directly because of him. The team always just generally gets better because of the stableness of topside, and then he doesn't have a team again next year. So the process will repeat until the end of time, but Solo looked really, really good in this game. He just completely outclassed Doklo, quite frankly. This is a really good matchup for the Camille into the Ornn, and it just did not matter. Solo completely obliterated Dokla in this game. He's easily my player of the game. You don't really play Ornn like that and not get player of the game. He absolutely deserved it. But big shout-outs here to Spica. I thought looked really good here on the Wukong. He's someone who I've been talking about being underrated, I think, for a majority of the year. Yes, TSM has really struggled, but this team has really relied on Spica a lot, and he's been really the only player on this team that's really done anything at certain points this year. And then I've been really, really high on Chime. I think Chime coming into TSM has almost completely turned this team around. Not instantaneously, but what he adds to this team is so much more than what they've had with almost anybody else on this roster in terms of a cohesive macro threat. Chime is going to be everywhere on the map, and he's going to threaten every single lane. And it really shows. Teams are afraid to push up against TSM now because Chime offers that, especially on a pick like Rakan where he can actually be everywhere with Mobies. Like, this is awesome, and you really, really love to see it. He's been playing phenomenal, and if he played the whole year, he would actually probably genuinely be in my all-pro conversation. I think he's been that good. Unfortunately, half a season is just really hard to justify putting you in that conversation. But yeah, Instinct had a really good one here. A couple of weird deaths that I kind of put on him a little bit, but comes up clutch in the big time with the big steal and ends up, running away with this game. TSM puts themselves in a good position, and they end up finishing it off. Honestly, everybody on TSM looked pretty good here, and they've looked pretty good for a little while now. I think this team has honestly gone from being overrated in terms of how they looked at the beginning of the year to, I think they're a little bit underrated now. They've gone on a nice spree, and I really like how the cohesion of this team has come together in recent weeks. But for CLG, a little bit of a rough loss here. Obviously, you were really hyped. Going into this week, you had locked upper bracket playoffs. This team was never supposed to be here. You go into a matchup with TSM, your historic rival. You're finally outpacing them. It's been so many years since you've been a better team than them, and you really shit the bed. Like, this game was not particularly close, and a lot of it, quite frankly, was contracts. And this is just who he is. Like, anybody who was shocked by this game doesn't know contracts. Like, this is just who he is. This is who he has always been in his career. He'll have multiple weeks where he'll go and be like, yes, I'm elevating this team and I'm making them look really good. I'm making aggressive plays and I'm winning my laners the game. And then all of a sudden he'll just have a couple games where it's like, dude, why are you in the LCS? Are you Iron 5? Like, it was not a good game from Contracts. He was just always in the wrong place and always in a position to be taken advantage of. The Poppy did not work. He's easily the dud of the game. One of the worst games he's had in a while, although I feel like you could say that for pretty much every Contracts loss. When he loses ridiculously hard. It just happens with him. Also, Dokla looked really bad in this game. Getting outpaced by an Ornn as a Camille is a really bad look, especially when that Ornn hasn't been playing competitive for the whole year. Not the best look at all, but Dokla is someone who has always played that aggressive style, similar to Contracts. They are very feast or famine players, and unfortunately, in this game, it was very, very much a famine for them. I do want to give a shout out to Luger, who I think I've done this like 85 times in pretty much all of CLG's losses this year. Was still looking really good, even though this team wasn't. He actually won lane here against Instinct and Chime. Just couldn't translate it, because eventually the Jinx did get online, and the Wukong was strong, and the Ornn had gold, and the Azir had gold, and the Rakan was everywhere. It didn't matter that Luger had gold, and it didn't matter that he had Yumi on his back. There was just too much of an obstacle to overcome for him to win the game, but like usual for CLG, even when everything else is going wrong, this bot lane still looks very competent and very good, so I really like what they're able to put together, but the inconsistency of the CLG team will never not bite them in the ass when it's the worst. Luckily for them, they've pretty much already locked exactly where they're going to be in playoffs. This just doesn't help their confidence all that much. Outlook-wise, like I said, CLG's basically locked for either third or fourth, maybe fifth here in the playoffs. Not the best spot to be in, not the worst. It's upper bracket. It gives you a chance to win and put yourself in a position to face the top two, but obviously could be better than losing to TSM here. And then for TSM, like I said, you've basically locked 7th place. Technically, there is a world in which you can get all the way up to 6th and get into winner's bracket, but you're requiring FlyQuest to go on a pretty massive losing streak, not only losing to Immortals, but then also losing to you at the end of the week, which is just super unlikely. So we're going to say that for now, TSM is mostly locked into that 7th spot, and I think they're going to be happy. They're the best of kind of that lower tier of talent. They were kind of grouped with them all year long, and they definitely have taken a step above, I think, the bottom 3 at this point. That leaves us with our final game here of day 1 action of the Super Week. Of course, we've got 2 more after this, but the final game here of day 1 was Immortals taking on Cloud9. And Cloud9 pick up a pretty important victory here. Obviously, they were locked for playoffs, definitely not locked for upper bracket. Same kind of position that FlyQuest is in, except they're a little bit more comfortable. If they win out this week, they actually put themselves in a pretty interesting predicament for a 3rd or 4th place finish. But they do exactly what they need to do right now, which is take down Immortals. Now, obviously, this is a game Cloud9 should be winning, but they won it hard. Obviously, Immortals, when they lose, sometimes they just lose bad. And unfortunately, this was one of those games. I think you could definitely credit some of the stuff here on Immortals. You know, they did some things, but overall, I think Cloud9 just looked generally better, like in every category. And that starts with the mid-jungle duo, which I really think has gotten online in recent weeks. I think that the Blabber-Jensen duo was kind of a slow starter over the course of the year. I think definitely Blabber looked good, but there were moments where Jensen just didn't feel connected to him. He didn't want to play that aggressive mentality. I think they've both gotten on the same page in recent weeks, or at least in this week. Jensen has started to step up his game when Blabber started to dip, and this week it felt a little bit, or at least in this game, it felt a lot more cohesive. The Trundle pick was really good for Blabber. It opened up a ton on the map for him. Not only did this body Kenvi in the jungle, but this created so much pressure to do pretty much anything he wanted in any lane. The Trundle pick has always been a favorite of Blabber's. I say that with almost every pick that he has, because he has like 3 or 4 that he's just so ludicrously good on, and I think this has always been one of them. Just a really good game overall from Blabber, Smite notwithstanding. But you got to give the player of the game here to Jensen, who is really, like, I've been really hard on Jensen, I think, over the course of the year. At times, rightfully so. At times, maybe not so much. I do think he was overrated a lot going into this split. I was a little bit worried about his ability to come back after having what was, quite frankly, his worst split of all time last year on Team Liquid. People forget that because he had a decent World Championships, probably the best player on TL, but he was not good at all in LCS. He comes back over here to Cloud9, plays a lot better. This is definitely looking more like old Jensen. Not to say he's perfect. I still don't think he's like the superstar that he once was, maybe in like 2019, 2018, but he's a good player. He's a top 5-ish mid laner in the region, and that's definitely enough to make this Cloud9 team competitive, and quite frankly, he's really good on this Taliyah pick. This pick has really unlocked him. When they go to the other things that they think are kind of meta, it doesn't necessarily work in the same way. The Taliyah pick has really unlocked Jensen, and it's easily been his best pick of the split, and he's going to get player of the game for his performance on it in this one. He was really good. This was very similar to a Xiaohu level RNG performance in the sense of you usually see Taliyah as a pick that usually they use to accelerate somebody else on the map, most notably the bot laner, into a position where it's really strong. But C9 did a very interesting thing, and they put a lot of resources into the Taliyah, told her to get online because wherever she goes now is the problem, and it really worked out for C9. I want to give a lot of credit to Blabber for that. I want to give a lot of credit to Sven for that. I've definitely been critical of Sven. It very much feels like he only plays Yuumi and Lulu, but maybe that's all you need. Like, at times, that really is all you need, and it absolutely worked in this game. The Lulu was super clutch, was able to keep the Sivir alive in those late game team fights, was able to keep the Taliyah alive quite a bit, and enable a lot of the plays that she wanted to make around the map. Overall, it just felt like C9 looked a lot more cohesive as a unit in this game, and I think that is what you wanted to see from a team that, quite frankly, struggled quite a bit last week. Moving on to Immortals, though, there are takeaways from this game, and I don't think I'm going to agree with the majority here. And I've disagreed with the majority when it came to Immortals, like, most of the year, I think, because a lot of people are going to put this game on Lost, and yes, his positioning at times is giga awful. I'm not going to disagree with that, but honestly, he looks tilted out of his mind because he gets to the point where it's like, you picked me Draven Nautilus as a lane, and then Nautilus left, and you let me 1v2 all lane. I'm up 20 CS, and I can't do anything about it because no one wants to help me, and now I'm getting ganked. Like, it's so infuriating to see a team comp where you draft Aatrox, Ahri, Draven as your 3 lanes, and you never go to the Draven. What is even the point of this pick? This is the 2nd time in a row that they've done this. I don't understand what the game plan is. Even if you win on Draven, you have to really win on Draven. The entire point of this pick is to snowball, and they put almost no resources into it. I just can't imagine they have any clue what they're trying to do with this. So at this point, just stop picking it. If you don't want to snowball it, if you don't want to go bot, don't pick Draven. It's really that simple. I just don't understand. For that reason, Ignar's going to get my dud of the game here. He tried, and he did get Draven a lead. Remember, Draven was up in this matchup. Lost was winning, as he should be as Draven into Sivir. And then everybody abandoned him. Nautilus is gone. Poppy is gone. And it didn't matter. None of the advantages that he actually created could be translated into any actual macro plays because no one even tried to invest in him. He had some moments where it looked okay, but then he gets to the point in the late game where he's not this, like, fed Draven. He's just kind of neutral with the Sivir, and then he just dies straight up, and now he gets so far behind that the Draven pick is worthless. So a lot of people are going to blame this on Lost. For me, this is just a brain fart of team making, like, of team decisions. Like, I just don't get it, and maybe I'm going crazy, but, like, I don't get why you would pick this and then completely ignore the lane. But that's also on Kenvi, and quite frankly, I'm running out of excuses for Kenvi. I've talked about it all year long about how his teammates haven't been playing well. Well, his teammates are playing a lot better, maybe not in this game, but Kenvi continues to make really, really bad decisions. And I don't know if he's just tilted out of his mind. He certainly looked like it on cam, but, like, this is not the Kenvi we saw in Academy. The Kenvi we saw in Academy did a really good job of playing from ahead, and quite frankly, we never really had to see him play from behind. He's learning how to play from behind in LCS, and it's not going well. He is not on the same level as I think a lot of the other junglers in that respect. There is a lot of growth left to do in his game, and I'm curious to see if that'll happen at an LCS level, because after this year, I'm not sure if the organization's going to want to give him another run at the LCS level. Obviously, this guy can still be one of the better junglers in the region. He's had that talent the entire time. It's just about unlocking it. I don't know if he's going to do it here. But overall, this IMT team just still doesn't have a clue as to how to play macro on the map. They get to a point in the game where it's just, they basically fall down and give up. When they're super far behind, they lose all sense of effort. And I've never really seen a team quite like that at a pro level. It's definitely disappointing to see. But outlook-wise for Immortals, they're technically still in the playoff race. In fact, they're tied for 8th. All they have to do is win one game, and they're right in that position with Golden Guardians. So, you know, it's technically still possible. The end of their schedule is not particularly easy. They have to face FlyQuest and CLG on the final 2 days. Both games that really aren't super winnable for them, but technically it's possible. CLG can always run it. FlyQuest was on a huge losing streak. They are technically still in the playoff race, and I think it's possible. As for C9, it's a good win here. They continue to kind of build upon, you know, the chemistry that I think they were starting to feel towards the beginning of the year. That all kind of got wiped away last week. I think they got their form back at least a little bit here. Immortals tends to do that to people, but it's a good look for Cloud9. Obviously, they're still in the running for a pretty good playoff placement. Even though they're locked for playoffs, they probably want to improve their spot. If they can get up to 3 or 4, they're going to be a lot happier about that, I think. That's going to go ahead and bring us into day 2 here of the Super Week of Week 8 here in the LCS. And we kicked off day 2 with a really fun matchup with playoff implications here between 100 Thieves and CLG. 100 Thieves picking up a big win here. They really needed this one. Obviously, a rough loss to FlyQuest the day before. CLG also had a rough loss to TSM. Both teams looking to bounce back here. 100 Thieves does so in a really, really confident manner. CLG had this game in the bag, quite frankly. They were off to a really, really good start, and then a couple of really, really questionable misplays later, and 100T is walking away with the W. So let's talk about what 100T did right. Mostly, they just didn't screw up. They put themselves in positions where they had numbers advantages, whether they knew they were going to be getting into fights or not. They had numbers advantages, and they put themselves in a position where even if they were going to fight, they were going to take smart fights, and then by the time you had to fight a 5v5 here, they were back up in gold. And they were in a position where they actually have a really devastatingly disgusting teamfight comp. And that's quite frankly what CLG couldn't allow to happen. This is a comp that I think overall, like, yes, that comp is good late, like Ornn, Jarvan, Azir, Sivir's good late, but I don't know how it's going to beat Aatrox, Wukong, Seraphine, Aphelios, Leona. Like, these are two... CLG had to win this game after a certain point, especially with that gold lead, but once they gave that gold lead over to 100 Thieves, it was basically over. There was nothing they could do. Big shout out to Someday. Those Aatrox plays! Woo! Someday on Aatrox. I've been talking about this for years. I know a lot of people haven't followed the channel for as long as I've been talking about this, because I haven't talked about it very recently, but Someday Aatrox is like the biggest treat in the world. I don't know if there's any champion, like, player combination that I personally enjoy more. He just simply does not lose on the Aatrox. I can vividly remember times where he had that split in Academy when they brought Fake God up on 100T so they could play Ryu, and he had that split in Academy, and he got to play Aatrox a couple times in Academy, and he went, like, legendary in almost every game. Like, the difference between his Aatrox and, like, the average player at a North American level is just so absurd, and it's always fun to watch. The champion is relatively meta again. I wouldn't say incredibly meta, but relatively meta. And Someday absolutely destroys people on it. It's always, always fun to watch, and I'm glad he got it here. He's my player of the game. He looked great with those backline engages there on the Aatrox, and man, that champion can never die if you do not build anti-heal. But, I mean, look at this teamfight comp. Everybody else did well, too. Big shout out to Huhi and FBI, who have continued to be a strong point for this 100T team. I think a lot of people were really questioning them early, but I really like how they're playing. The question marks for me have always been the jungle mid duo, at least so far in summer. And they stepped up in this game. Abadage had some really, really good Seraphine ults, and then Closer did a good job to come back from what was frankly an early deficit. But overall, a good game from 100 Thieves, even if it wasn't entirely in their hands to win. They did everything they had to in order to get the game back. Moving on to CLG, though. This should have been free. This should have been completely free. Contracts was so ahead in the early game on the Jarvan. It's a pick that he does a really good job of gaining an early lead on. And then he turns into contracts, again, he turns into bad contracts. All of a sudden, he has this early lead and he walks in 1v4 and dies. And Poom's walking around trying to get vision on Lulu with absolutely no one trying to protect him, and he just dies. All of a sudden, their gold lead's gone, and 100 Thieves wins the game. What was going on? Did their brains just melt halfway through this game? There was a distinct moment in the game where it was just the switch was flipped and now we're bad. And I don't know how you get to that point. Honestly, it's pretty incredible, and it's honestly insane to watch. Only CLG could pull that off, but Poom is going to get my dud of the game, because at least for contracts, while he did int a lot of the game away, at least he had the good early game, and he was kind of the reason they were in a good spot to begin with. Poom just inted, for no reason, and so Poom for me is going to get the dud of the game. Luger was pretty good. Palafox I thought had some moments, although there were times where I was screaming at my monitor throughout the second half where it's like, Palafox, go! Hit the go button now! And he didn't do that, and so it is what it is. I think maybe he's overreacting to contracts and Poom always hitting the go button in this game, but overall this game was super duper winnable for CLG, and they're going to feel really bad to have taken another loss here. That's 0-2 to start the week. Definitely not how you want your final week of the regular season to go. Obviously, things aren't, drastic measures yet. They're still sitting in a comfortable spot where the 4 or 5 seed is pretty attainable for them, but, before this, I think realistically you could see them go up as high as 3, and maybe even 2 if things went right. So CLG was definitely sitting in a good position going into this week. A good enough position that these 2 int games that they had at the beginning of the week aren't going to affect them too much. But for 100T, they're going to be really glad to win here. This keeps their hopes of second place really directly in front of them. Not that they would be gone, but it keeps it directly in front of them now. They really control their own destiny. Now that they've won this game, as long as they win against TL tomorrow, they are locked in second place. They get that first round bye, which is always huge for every team here in NA. So definitely a good win for them, and they looked good doing it. Not only did they get behind, but they came back from being behind. Yes, it wasn't entirely them, but like I said, they did everything they had to, and that's really all you can ask. Sometimes you don't have to take the game from them. Sometimes you just have to be in the right position to make sure that you can accept the game when the other team gives it to you, and that's what 100T did in this one. Moving on to game 2 here of day 2, and good for Team Liquid. They get another game that they can absolutely win. Of course, I'm talking about Golden Guardians taking on Team Liquid here, and it's a pretty easy win for TL. Not only earlier this week did they get Dignitas, they've gotten a team that hasn't won since they beat Dignitas 4 weeks ago. So, not a great showing from Golden Guardians, but this is exactly what you want to see from TL. A lot of this can be summed up to, oh, you gave Hansama Draven in a Draven meta? That was probably not right. And, that's fair. I think that's a fair thing to say overall in terms of how this game went. Hans was just so out of control in this game on the Draven. Not only did the team play around him super well, I love the Viego-Talia combo. I actually think, I'm not a huge Viego fan overall. I've talked about that. I think it's pretty overrated in the meta as a pick, but with Draven, I actually think it has some really neat intricacies, and I think it can help out the champion a lot. And then obviously Talia's super helpful there. You pick the Amumu to even just go further for the we're just going to kill you over and over again comp. And it works. Draven just gets snowballed out of control here. Bjergsen and Santorin Core all play a really good game in order to set up Hans to be the player of the game, which he was. Not only has he been struggling, but this is the exact kind of game that gets you out of a funk like that, because you get to play your main and you get to obliterate another pro on it. And that always feels good. I don't know why you blind pick Kalista, but you know what? Sure, if you want to do it, 6A's played a ton, an absolute ton of Kalista this year. You can go and check the stats. Hans probably was just if he's going to blind it, I'm just going to go Draven. And he destroyed him, and it's really good to see Hans played really well. This is the Hans I want to see in playoffs, not the one that we've been getting for a majority of summer. But yeah, big shout out to Santorin for really being there as the assistants. Him and Bjergsen brought so much help from the top side to help get that Draven out of control. And then big shout out to Core. I always talk about this Amumu pick being super feast or famine, because oftentimes the full engage from Amumu can just as easily bait your team into dying as it can kill the enemy team. But in this one, it was really, really beneficial. When the enemy is clumped up together like they were in this game, it's actually super beneficial for Amumu to be on your side because you can take advantage of that in one fail swoop. So big shout out to TL. I don't really know how to go into depth here because really it was just like, oh, you gave him Draven? Oh, the whole team's bottom lane? Oh, the game is over. Like, there was not a like 85-step process. Golden Guardians had some bad macro decisions. TL got basically the first 2 dragons for free while Golden Guardians just sat there and watched them. Literally. It's not like they were doing anything else. They literally sat at the dragon pit and watched them. So, shout out to that. That was certainly an interesting play. But outside of that, like, TL didn't do anything completely spectacular. They just had the better draft. They executed on it, and the game was over. So, that's all I can really say about it from a TL perspective. From a Golden Guardians perspective, like, this team is, like, I talked about it last week, I'm full panic mode. I am slamming the panic button at this point. I'm like, oh my god, we are bad. Like, this is a bad loss, and nobody on this team looked good. 6A has a good score. He couldn't position to save his life in this game. Ole was garbage on these Nautilus engages. He couldn't peel an orange in this game, and it was unbelievable to watch. It was you pair a Lee Sin here against a Draven comp. It's like, oh no, what are you even trying to do? Overall, just hate the Golden Guardians draft, hate how they executed on the draft. The macro might be the worst that I've seen in a major region in many years. And now you're sitting at 4-13 and you barely control your own destiny. I talked about this before. If Immortals' schedule wasn't so hard, I would find it almost laughable that Golden Guardians could make playoffs. But if Immortals doesn't win a game, you get to the point where all Golden Guardians has to do by the end of day 3 is beat Dignitas, the worst team in the league. So somehow, even though they're playing this bad, they did have a good enough early start to the year that they've at least put themselves in a position where if they can somehow beat the worst team in the league on the final game of the year, they can make playoffs, which is absurd to say, but golly, this team is not good. Ole, by the way, is the dud of the game. I don't know if I made that official. Nautilus was awful. The Nautilus was atrocious. Blaze Olive wasn't much better on the Ahri. Like I said, the Lee Sin pick was never going to do anything. And then you have Licorice on Ornn. Shout out Ornn. Top lane didn't matter in this game, so I don't know. Golden Guardians, somehow they're still in a good position to make playoffs, and that's infuriating to me. As for Team Liquid, they're putting themselves in a really good position as well. They've now set themselves up with, their 2 wins this week. As long as they face 100 Thieves tomorrow, and the winner of that game, I believe, actually gets second place. I think worst case scenario, I don't know how LCS tiebreakers work. They might have to play a tiebreaker game with the same record. And in that spot, they're at least putting themselves in a position to get second place. If TL can get a bye in the first round, I think that's really going to help them a lot. Obviously, you put yourself in a position where you don't even have to worry about the 7-8 teams, but even outside of that, just getting a week to prepare and a week to game plan and strategize and come up with some weird shenanigans is always an advantage, in my opinion, if you have the coaching infrastructure to do it. And I think TL would love to put themselves in that position, and this win gets them as close as they can get to that without going 3-0. Moving on to our third game now here of day 2, and we had a classic matchup with TSM in day 1 here where they faced off against CLG. We have equally as classic of a matchup as they were taking on Cloud9. We had Cloud9 versus TSM here. Day 2, a lot on the line. C9 picking up a really integral win here, and I think there were a lot of reasons for that. C9 really struggled last week. We talked about that in their day 1 game, I should say. They really struggled in week 7. It really felt like a lot of the cohesion that they had been building up over the course of the year had definitely fallen to the wayside in favor of, let's just run at people and just see what happens. But this week definitely looks a lot more cohesive, and I think a lot of that has to do with draft. I'm not going to say it's entirely draft, but one of the things I commend C9 for, at least more so than a lot of the other teams, and this is something I've commended a team like OMG in the LPL for as well, is know what you're good at and play what you're good at. It doesn't have to be meta. It doesn't have to be the strongest thing right now. If you can play it better than anybody else, it's going to work. And that's what we saw with Anivia coming out in the mid lane this game for Jensen. We know Jensen's a good Anivia. He's been playing it for years. That's basically the first champion you learn if you grow up in Denmark is Anivia. And he had such a phenomenal game on it here. He's easily the player of the game. He abused Maple's Talia in this game. And Maple overall, he hasn't been very good this year, but even in this matchup, like, Anivia Talia Talia can really abuse that matchup. Anivia not very mobile, someone who has a hard time getting off consecutive roams, but loves to fight in those choke points, and luckily for Anivia, Talia can often create those choke points with her ultimate, but you can also get some extremely nasty combos here because you have the Poppy Anivia, and that combo can be really deadly. You could set up the Anivia wall, and then all of a sudden, boom, Poppy slams you right into it, you're stunned, and you're dead. All of that, along with a Draven going into a Sivir in the bottom lane, and you have the recipe to completely snowball this game out of control if you play the early game well, and that's exactly what Cloud9 did in this one. Jensen gets to a point in the game where Anivia is just not going to be stopped. There's no one who really deals with Anivia on TSM's comp. The Renekton, who really had most of the gold, is certainly not going to be able to effectively deal with an Anivia. Neither is an Olaf. Olaf at least has a chance, but he just dies significantly too fast. You have so many immunities here. You've got Poppy to stop a lot of things from happening. You've got Gwen to go completely immune, Draven to do a ton of damage, Alistar to peel as much as possible. You have so much here for Cloud9 that I can see a world in which TSM just really had no chance. So Jensen looks really good here. He's looked a lot better in recent weeks. I talked about this earlier in the week. He's looked a lot better in recent weeks, so much so that I think his stock for me has risen considerably. He was kind of just a middle-of-the-pack mid laner for me for a considerable amount of this split, but over the recent weeks, I really do believe he has turned into one of the more proactive and draftable around mids in the league, where I really think you can put him on the central focus of the team, and you can do well on him in a playoff sense. Obviously, TSM's not the best opponent ever, but Jensen did good here. And then the Draven pick. We've seen this be incredibly successful in the West, just in general. It's not been nearly as successful globally in the Eastern regions, but for some reason in the West, a lot of people really have trouble going into Draven. If you focus that lane, if you can get the Draven ball rolling, if he can snowball out of control, he's a very, very, very difficult character to stop in this game, especially when he's as strong as he is right now. Sivir is obviously a relatively okay matchup as long as you get through the early game. Unfortunately, Instinct just wasn't good enough. So overall, I thought Cloud9 played really well, and I like the draft. Hopefully they can keep this up. As for TSM, not a great loss here, although it is a bit expected. Their win over CLG, maybe you got expectations a little too high. They're not quite on this upper bracket level. They're still a good team though, and they performed a little bit in this game. They made it a little bit interesting, even if the end result wasn't all that close. Mostly, I'm talking about Solo here in the top lane. He was very good against CLG, absolutely destroying Dokla in the Ornn versus Camille matchup. He comes back here, picks up the Renekton, a pick that we're seeing a lot more commonly picked up in the Eastern regions now that he's playable again. Obviously, top laners love their Renekton, but we see it here into the Gwen, and I do think it can be a pick that works. I just don't like the team comp necessarily surrounding it. You have that Renekton Olaf that you really want to combine to make plays with, but at the end of the day, you're gonna get outscaled if Draven gets ahead, and you're really not gonna have a lot of opportunities to actually beat him in the late game. Nobody else on this team really picked up the pace, though. Pretty much everybody else was kind of asleep at the wheel, if you will. Maple especially. He just got completely outplayed by Jensen. Like I said earlier, this is a matchup where Talia should have a lot of agency in how the macro plays work out of it, but Maple just didn't have that. He was not on that same wavelength with the rest of his team. He's going to get my dud of the game. He's gotten that quite a few times this season. He's actually, I would say he's been a disappointment, but this is honestly what I expected. A lot of people were really hyped about Maple coming to TSM in the offseason, but man, at the end of the day, the last time we saw Maple in the LPL, he was just a shell of his former self. Coming to TSM has certainly not fixed any of those problems, and while I don't think he's been a complete disaster, he's certainly not been a plus for a TSM team that is barely clinging on to playoff hopes. So overall, while I think TSM is moving in the right direction with picks with players like Solo and Chime and Spiga, I think being a little underrated, I definitely still think there is some holes to fill in their lineup. But for C9, this is a great win. This puts them in a much better position sitting at 10-7. Now, even if they lose tomorrow, they should be in a situation where they can at least play for the tiebreaker to get 5th place. They are in a position where potentially they could even get as high as 4th place, which is huge. It would take a couple things going wrong. CLG would have to lose tomorrow and go 0-3, which is obviously not super likely, but it is possible. And so C9 has put themselves probably in the best possible position they could be in after what was a very rough Week 7. Moving on to our 4th game now here of day 2. We had another interesting one, a battle of the green teams, as we had FlyQuest taking on Immortals. FlyQuest picking up a big win here, putting themselves at 9-8. Really good position to be going into the final day of LCS here. A big win over a team that, quite frankly, they should beat. Immortals not exactly the kings of consistency right now, and this game definitely proved that. But, man, FlyQuest had a good week so far, huh? That win earlier in the week was really, really solid against 100 Thieves. A good team where Takuya and Johnson really just stepped up and proved that they are carries that are good enough to be near the top of the LCS. And then they said, what if I did it again against Immortals here? And they did. Both of them playing really well. Obviously, a lot of people criticized this FlyQuest draft when it happened because, haha, NA, Lucian, Nami. But as we've noticed, and as I've pointed out consistently on this channel, Lucian Nami can be an incredibly dangerous lane to go into, even if you counterpick it, which I do think it was counterpicked here with Aphelios Lulu. Lucian Nami can still do a lot in the late game. The problem with Lucian has never been that his damage falls off towards the back half. It's always been that his range prevents him from being aggressive in the back half. But if you put yourself in a situation where you have enough peel and you can kind of get a nice flank in from your top lane Aatrox, you maybe have someone blowing up on the LeBlanc, you can actually find that dream Lucian fight, and that was found with the pentakill here today. Obviously, Johnson played, I thought, relatively okay before the penta, but he completely took over that late game team fight and basically won them the game. I think there are a lot of people that are going to want to give this award to Takuya. I think there are some people that are going to want to give this award to Jose Deodo here in the jungle on the Vi, but for me, it was like Johnson was just playing super duper well, I think, towards the back half of this game. Lucian is a very difficult champion to pilot correctly when the other team knows how to play against it. Luckily, he did it really well, and it caps off what has been like a really good week and year overall, I think, for Johnson. I know a lot of people are going to make the meme, but I completely agree with it. Johnson with Aphromoo versus Johnson without Aphromoo, it is a completely different ball game, and it really feels like that is true. Aphromoo is back here now on FlyQuest with Johnson, and it has completely unlocked him to be able to play some of the best League of Legends of his career. So he is going to get my player of the game here, even if some people think it should go to Takuya in the mid lane, which I don't even necessarily disagree with. This is the second game in a row where he plays the LeBlanc, this time into another assassin in Ahri, which I actually think is super Ahri favored in the current meta, but Power of Evil just can't hold a candle to how Takuya plays the game. Takuya is able to completely take over the map here on the LeBlanc, is able to push forward leads, is able to control the pacing of the game, and ends up in a situation where everybody's afraid of him. He's able to blow up the Wukong. Hell, he's probably able to even blow up the Sejuani by the end of the game with as much gold as he had over on them. That is a dangerous threat. Even if LeBlanc isn't this terrifying threat like she has been in years past, she can still kill you, and it definitely mattered in that team fight. She puts the entire enemy team in a position where they have to either choose to go in on the Lucian or get blown up, right? Like, if they go all in to try to stop the Lucian with this low range, with engages, Sejuani ult, Wukong going in, then your backline is completely in danger to LeBlanc. But if you don't do that, then Vi, Aatrox, all of these people can go in on the engage, and Lucian has the time, he has the shielding from Nami to basically be able to outtrade pretty much anybody, including Aphelios with the Lulu on top. And so, I really, really like how FlyQuest played this team comp. It's overall really fun. Takuya's always been phenomenal on LeBlanc. It's the pick that I think I would most associate with him, and he definitely pulled it off here. But everybody on FlyQuest deserves a round of applause for this game. Johnson, Takuya, Aphromoo, Jose, even Philip in the top lane on that Aatrox. I thought everybody pulled their weight. As for Immortals, I mean, this goes back to what I was saying. I don't think it's exactly the same here. Obviously, you don't have the Draven in the bottom lane to completely play through, but at the end of the day, like, this is a comp that really needs to scale into the late game. You need that Sejuani to get tanky. You need Ahri and Aphelios to be in a position where they can contest the LeBlanc and contest the Lucian, because they're not going to be able to do that early. Unfortunately, they just can't stay out of trouble. Kenvi gets completely caught out early multiple times by Jose Deodo, puts themselves in a bad position. Power of Evil plays so passive on the Ahri, not even looking to try to match Takuya's roams. And there's really not much else anybody else on the team can do. My dud of the game is going to go to Kenvi in the jungle. I just don't think his performance here was all that inspiring on the Wukong. Really hasn't been at all this year. When he gets behind like he did in this game, he does a poor job of trying to get that lead back and playing from behind. So definitely not a huge fan of what Kenvi was able to accomplish, but it's not like anybody on this team is playing well right now. In fact, honestly, if you're just taking this week into account, I think there's a real case to be made that this Immortals is closer to week 2 Immortals than they were to last week's Immortals. I was hyping this team up as like clearly better than like Golden Guardians and Dignitas, a team that if they started off the season a little bit better, they would probably be clearly in playoffs right now, kind of in a TSM position, but man, this week has been awful for them. There's really nothing else to say. They've continuously proved that when the pressure is on, when they need to perform, they just cannot do it, and I think that really sums up this lineup. Outlook-wise for this team, a lot's got to go right for them to make playoffs. Luckily, a lot's going right. Golden Guardians also can't buy a win, so guess what? You guys have the same record. The problem is that tomorrow you have to beat CLG, while Golden Guardians only has to beat Dignitas. You haven't put yourself in a super favorable position, but technically, it is still alive, and it is still possible, which is insane to say for this Immortals team. As for FlyQuest, this is a very good win. This locks them in the upper bracket, which is super good for them. This actually puts them in a position where they could theoretically get 5th place, a relatively good spot for them. I think they'd much rather play a team like CLG than a team like TL or 100 Thieves, in my opinion. And they definitely put themselves in the position to at least fight for that. C9 would have to lose and they would have to win, but technically it is possible. Definitely not the most improbable thing that the world has ever seen. So FlyQuest has done everything they can do this week to put themselves in the best position possible after going on that massive losing streak. Kind of similar to what a team like Cloud9 has been doing this week. Getting your form back at the right time can really put you in a good spot, and I think FlyQuest has definitely done that this week. Moving on to our 5th game here of day 2 action. Remember, we've got 3 days of action here in the Super Week, so one more day after this. But moving on to our 5th and final game of day 2, we've got Evil Geniuses taking on Dignitas, an actual battle of first versus worst. And it went as expected. EG completely dominated Dig in this game. It was not even remotely close. Shout out to this bot lane. Zeri Yumi is disgusting to watch. There's really nothing else I can say about it at this point. I don't think I'm nearly as aggressive against Zeri as some other people out there, because I certainly think she has counters. We've seen it multiple times in other regions, but I really do think it takes like a certain level to be able to counter her, and I don't know if anybody in the West has that level. Really, the counter to Zeri is just like hope and pray that you can catch her out of position or set up a really convoluted way to catch her off guard. And teams in NA, quite frankly, just don't try to make that kind of play. So Danny and Vulcan were just untouchable this game. It was actually undealable with. Shout out to Blue. He picked the Lissandra in an attempt to try to do something. You have Vi with literally point and click CC. None of it matters because Yumi heals through all the damage that you could possibly do here. You're never really put in a position where you're actually in danger as Zeri, and honestly, it's infuriating to watch at points. Big shout out to EG for executing on it, but this comp is disgusting. Danny's my player of the game. He played this area immaculately. He was able to position well. He was able to take over the fights, and, you know, he won the game for them, but at the same time, like, what did it cost? You know what I mean? Like, it's not super fun to watch because it just absolutely torches everybody in this region, but at the same time, if they're not going to ban it, you should pick it. Like, if they're going to leave it up, then go for it, especially the Zeri Yumi. If you're going to leave both halves of that up, you'd be stupid not to go for it. So shout out to Danny, he did a really good job. And shout out to Vulcan. I think at one point he was like 4 full levels up on Biofrost, which is actually insane. But that's what Yumi does. Yumi just collects experience. She sits there, and she makes your AD carry untouchable. And that's basically what happened in this game. You put a Yumi on a Zeri in North America, no one is ever catching that girl, and it didn't happen here. Unbelievably well played by both Vulcan and Danny. Vulcan, you know, shout out, as good of a Yumi game as you could possibly get. He was super impactful on the outcome of the game, but at the same time, it's Yumi. How much do you actually put into that? And then, honestly, big shout out to Impact in the top lane. We obviously don't see a lot of Jax, even though, you know, he has a skin for Jax in the game. We don't often see a lot of Jax coming out of Impact, but he took up the challenge against Hoon, and feels like everybody's kind of been taking up the challenge against Hoon recently, and he obliterated him. The Jax was a huge problem for this enemy team to deal with. Not only did they have to try to team fight against the Zeri Yumi, but you have a Jax in the side lane that'll end the game if you don't deal with him. Pretty tough predicament to be in, so, you know, shout out to EG. They looked really good this week. As for Dignitas, I mean, they're the worst team. They tried. Blue tried here on the Lissandra. He actually wasn't in that bad of a position early game. Obviously, everybody knows I'm huge about the Lissandra into Ahri matchup. I think that's super pro Lissandra, but there's only so much you can do with the Fed Zeri Yumi in the game and a Jax in the side lane. Like, where are you actually going to get your XP? I thought Blue actually played it relatively okay. I don't think Spawn or Biofrost played that bad. It just, like, it didn't matter how well they played it. They got outplayed early in the game, and they could never recover, and that's basically what happened there. And then the top side of the map is really where I think Dig got let down. Hoon has been a huge disappointment in the top lane. He's going to be my dud of the game. He just wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready for this in Academy. He was a mid-tier to low-tier Academy top laner. I don't know why they thought he was going to be ready to come play in the LCS, but he's looked pretty much exactly as I expected. He was not good in Academy. He's come up. He's been even worse in the LCS. He's going up against some of the best top laners that North America has to offer, and he's just not going to be able to hang with that, and it's very clear to that. I hope he gets the time he needs to develop in the minor leagues down in Academy before he gets called up to get another shot here at LCS, because he just isn't ready. This is a young player that I think could be there eventually, but quite frankly, he's just being thrown to the wolves right now, and he's not coming out alive. XU also definitely struggled in this game, and he struggled as well. he's someone who I think was definitely more ready to make the LCS jump, but there's only so much you can do when your team is just a dumpster fire. I'll say that about Spawn as well. I actually think Spawn has performed rather well. He's been probably the best player on this team ever since he got called up. I don't even think it's been that close. So, I mean, that's it for Dig, right? A lot of these players are thrust into bad positions. Somehow, some way, they're sitting at 3-14. They are not out of playoffs yet. I don't even know how to tell you that with one more day left in the split. They go up against Golden Guardians tomorrow. If they pick up the win in that matchup and Immortals loses, they play a 3-way tiebreaker for the 8 seed, which is unbelievable to me. The fact that a team like Dignitas sitting at 3-14 is technically still in playoffs. It's pretty hilarious and kind of a microcosm of, I think, what this LCS system likes to breed. As for EG, they're the number 1 seed. As long as things don't go wrong, as long as they win their game tomorrow, they are the number 1 seed in North America, and they've earned it. They've been really, really consistently beating up on the lower tier teams, which is something that you have to do in the regular season. Quite frankly, it was something this EG team did not do last year or last split. Even though they won in playoffs, they won the championship, they were not a very good team in the regular season. So to see them come out and to really dominate the regular season this split, I think has definitely been refreshing. Hopefully they can keep it up, though. Obviously, I talked about their shortcomings. We'll talk about that more when we give in-depth analysis on the playoff teams. But right now, EG just looks about as good as you could want them to. That's going to bring us into our third and final day here of the Super Week, in the final week, week 8 here of LCS action. And we kick off the final third day here with a matchup between CLG and Immortals. And CLG does pick up the win. Now, this is huge for them. Obviously, a little bit of struggle coming out at the beginning of the week. Losing to TSM, losing to 100 Thieves. They do pick up an all-important win here to go 11-7. Haha, funny. It's the reverse of their curse number. And that's about as good as you can get here. Obviously, some things do have to go right for them to lock 4th place on their own, but they basically set themselves up for that to happen. As long as Cloud9 loses to Evil Geniuses later in the day, CLG will have 4th place all on their own, which has got to be a huge dub for this team. And obviously, they played well in this game. Let's talk about it. They had control from very early on, mostly because there was a pretty big diffy in the Miffy, as the mid diff here was huge. It was Palafox and Power of Evil just were not on the same level of existence here. Honestly, I don't even hate the Victor matchup into Akali. I think you can play that as Victor really safe and get to a point in the game where you should be able to actively deal with Akali, but man, Palafox was not going to wait for that to happen. He played super aggressive early, really punishing any mistakes Power of Evil made, and was able to get a huge gold lead off and experience lead off on him, and then was just able to make plays around the map, really doing a lot to stop Kenvi from even being able to play the game. Obviously, Kenvi had a job here and was to make sure Palafox didn't get out of control. He didn't do that. Palafox got to a really good state on the Akali, where he was just able to completely decimate anybody who came across him. He's easily going to get my player of the game. And Palafox overall has just been so good this split. I know obviously there's been some memes about some of the things that he said in terms of like nameplates off, and he's kind of right about all of that, but man, like he's been so underratedly good. The CLG team has been very good just in general, but like him and Luger, I think have really been like the focal points of CLG so far this year. Palafox was so good to start the year. He went for a little bit of a dip in like weeks 3 and 4, but he's bounced back so well, I think, recently. And I think his synergy with Contracts is really, really good. Obviously, Contracts had a much better game here. He kind of ran it down in both of their games earlier this week, but settled it in a little bit here and was able to out-jungle Kenvi. Kenvi puts himself in a position where basically when Power of Evil loses, he has no control over the map because he's got a Wukong that can beat him up, and he's got an Akali that's usually with him. So not a lot he can do in that matchup, but still frustrating, but good on Contracts for not running it in this one. Always good to see. And then you got Luger. Luger, who just continues to be the most stable, unflinchable ADC in the region. I don't even know what else to tell you. He never has a bad game. He just doesn't. And even when this team loses, he's always relatively productive. He's never really out of position. Even when Poom is, Luger doesn't often get caught in that same predicament. I just really love how he's been playing, and I think he's going to go under the radar in terms of all pro votes as well as Palafox. So hopefully those two get the recognition they deserve, but CLG overall is going to be really happy to end the season with 11 wins. As for Immortals, tough loss here. It's a tough way to end your season. Well, I guess it's not technically over. If Dignitas is able to beat Golden Guardians, you've got that 3-way tie for the 8th seed. But It's out of your control now. You end the season 4-14 in your 18 games. Not the best way to end it. The jungle matchup was just completely run over. Like I said, once you got to that point where Akali could follow contracts around, it was over for Kenvi. Nothing he could do. So unfortunately, he's my dud of the game. I think you could realistically give that to Power of Evil in the mid lane as well, because PoE was really the one that allowed that Akali to get completely out of control by playing the matchup poorly. But at the same time, like, what are you really going to do? Like, it's not like he made a huge mistake. Kenvi was over-positioned and wasn't in a position to help Power of Evil when he was losing, which really was his responsibility this game, almost more than anything. The only thing that you have to do as Immortals is not let this Akali get out of control. Obviously, the Zeri is a problem, but you can relatively deal with Zeri as Sivir as long as you're relatively even. At least we've seen that in other regions, maybe not in NA, with how people fail to play against Zeri in NA. But at the same time, like, I felt like it could be relatively possible, and they just didn't allow it to happen. So unfortunately, Kenvi is going to get my dud of the game. Revenge got beaten up in the top lane against Dokla's Yone, his classic pick, is probably his most famous pick at this point. And then Lost in Ignar could not compete against Luger and Poomer, who were just a better bot lane. There's really no other way to say it. But yeah, I mean, shout out to Immortals. Their destiny is now in the hands of Dignitas. They have to hope they pick up a big win. Going 0-2 against Dig this year certainly dug them a hole. But technically, they're not dead in the water just yet. Theoretically, it's possible, just certainly not a good way to give yourself an opportunity. As for CLG, like I said, if C9 doesn't beat EG later in the day, they have clinched 4th place by themselves in the playoffs. That is huge for an organization that hasn't been top 6 in, 3 years? A very, very huge moment for CLG. You've got to be very excited for them, and hopefully they can perform. This is a team that obviously has done everything they can to prove to people that they are legit. In the regular season, they've beaten every single top team except for 100 Thieves at least once. There's really nothing that they haven't done to be able to prove to people that they are legit, but you have to hope that they hold up under pressure in the playoffs. It's going to be a pressure cooker of an environment, but hopefully the CLG team can keep the faith and keep on moving forward. Moving on to our second game here of day 3. We had the all-important one. We were just talking about this one and it having ripple effects on how the standings chalk up towards the end of this season. Of course, I am talking about Evil Geniuses taking on Cloud9, and EG does pick up the win here, which does solidify a few things. We'll get to that at the end. Let's talk about the game itself first. This was back and forth. Both teams really had points where it really felt like they were in control, but at the end, it was really EG's game to lose. And that was the truth of the situation is, even when C9 was starting to gain a little bit of momentum, Inspired would rip that away because this team comp is so devastating to actively have to play into. I can't even imagine being an AD carry and having to go into Ornn, Vi, Ahri, Sivir with a spell shield, and then Lulu to keep everyone alive. That is a nightmare to have to go into as a hyper carry. Unfortunately, Berserker had the task of doing that here in this game, and he just was not able to get it done. But big shout out to Inspired, obviously the flashy player from this game, pulling out the flashy play in this game, the phenomenal, what was it, like a 1v4, 1v3 in the jungle on the Vi. Vi, honestly, is a pick that you don't often see do super well in competitive. It can often be good, but it doesn't often, you know, take over the map. It's often a pick that you want to use for team fights to help set up the rest of your team, but Inspired's just so much of a better player than pretty much everybody he's been playing into this year that he's able to take Vi and completely dominate the game on it. And he absolutely did here. The Vi was completely able to take over, and he was phenomenal. He's going to get the player of the game very clearly. I don't think that's going to be up for much debate. He played so well across this game, and in my opinion, this one basically sealed his MVP status. I'm not, no spoilers for the LCS playoff primer coming out tomorrow, but this one basically sealed his MVP status. He was so good throughout the split, and this was just kind of a microcosm of that, going into a good team and a very good jungler in Blabber. But the rest of the team followed up as well. Impact made some really good plays topside on the Ornn, most notably drawing a bunch of attention, only to turn right around when he gets Lulu ulted and just completely clap the enemy team. Jojo had some really nice plays on the Ahri. Danny was doing some good backline damage on the Sivir. Overall, just a really good win for EG, kind of similar to the game that they've been playing all year long, where they're a good team. No one's necessarily being like, I'm way better than anyone else on the team. It's everybody pitching a little bit in, and then EG coming out with a pretty successful victory. As for Cloud9, A little bit of a rough loss here. This does put them in a situation where if FlyQuest can win in the next game, actually in game 3 here, they're going to be sent to a tiebreaker for 5th place. Now, obviously, Cloud9 would have wanted to finish a little bit better than 5th place in the regular season, but it is still up for grabs. They still can't control their own destiny. The difference between 4 and 5 is just side selection. So I think they're going to be very, very motivated to go into a series. I imagine they would much rather face off against CLG than Team Liquid just in terms of talent. And so they're definitely going to be still motivated to play, but this game was not perfect. I really feel bad for Berserker, but I do have to give him the dud of the game here. He's playing Twitch. Poor guy's playing Twitch into a Vi that's super fed. There's absolutely nothing he's going to be able to do in this game. She presses R, and before the R even ends, he's dead. And it's not fun to play as the Twitch. He did nothing in this game, and I don't blame him. It's not entirely his fault, but his positioning certainly wasn't perfect. He postured very aggressively because he thought he had the Yuumi with him. And of course, the Yuumi can only do so much to stop all of these people piling on top of you. But without this Twitch, this comp was simply never going to win this game. So unfortunately, Berserker not getting online was kind of detrimental to C9's chance at actively winning the game. But it's not like anybody else on the team actually played super well. Obviously, Sven didn't play the Yuumi great. One of the 2 champions he's really played at all this year. I think C9 might be pretty easy to draft against, or at least I'm worried that they might be pretty easy to draft against in playoffs, but we'll talk about that at another time. Blabber getting completely out-jungled by Inspired. He didn't even play a bad game. Inspired just played a phenomenal one, and then Jensen wasn't all that good here on the LeBlanc. Ari should be able to beat up the LeBlanc. I was talking about that earlier in the week, and JoJo, being the better player that he is, was able to get that done going into Jensen here. But overall, Cloud9, like I said, it's a tough loss for them to take because it knocks them down to, at best, 5th. But at the very least, they'll get a chance to win later in the day in a tiebreaker if FlyQuest is able to pick up the 3-0 week. So at least they'll have the opportunity to prove themselves and to put themselves in a position to get that 5 seed and to play CLG. They won't have side selection, but it's about as good as they can do right now. As for Evil Geniuses, #1 seed, baby. The #1 team in NA, and it is almost all North American talent with the exception of Inspired and kind of Impact, but, you know, Impact's basically North American at this point. You gotta cheer for this team. You just have to. They're so fun to watch. Not only are they the most fun team to watch in the region, but they represent the region, I think, very well. I really want this team to do well in playoffs and hopefully represent us well internationally. Kind of similar to how they did at MSI, hopefully a little better than what we saw at MSI, but Inspired's playing on a whole different level right now. Danny and Vulcan have taken an even bigger step up from what they were in spring. I think if this team was to go to an international event, they would prove to be even more deadly than they were in MSI, and they were top 4 there, even if they weren't perfect. So definitely hoping that this team can maintain their form and push through playoffs. Moving on to our 3rd game here now of day 3 action, and another one that had a lot of consequences when it came to the outcome of a lot of people's standings. This one, relatively important. TSM taking on FlyQuest. If FlyQuest can win, they can get into a tiebreaker with Cloud9 for 5th place, and they do so. They pick off TSM. TSM obviously looking a lot better recently, but still, FlyQuest is in a tier just above what they are able to accomplish here. Mostly because of the stepping up that this bot lane very, very much did in this week. You can say what you want about how Takuya has kind of carried this team quite a bit through the regular season, and I agree with you for the most part. Takuya has had a very good regular season, but this bot lane, I think, has been generally underrated by a majority of the community for a significant amount of time, and they really showed up when it mattered most. Obviously, I think they had taken a little bit of a step back. Them and Jose Deodo, I thought both took relatively, a couple steps back over the past few weeks during this losing streak, going up against better talent. But you put them back into an environment where they start to feel confident again. They can get their confidence back by playing teams like Immortals, playing teams like TSM, even getting a chance to take out a team like 100 Thieves. You put this FlyQuest team in a position where they're really feeling themselves, and they come back with a vengeance. Johnson was phenomenal again in this series. That is all 3 player of the series here, or player of the games, for Johnson for FlyQuest this week. An incredible week for Johnson. One of the best he's had in the LCS in his entire career. His positioning, immaculate. His game sense, very good. It is very difficult sometimes to play that Sivir into the Zeri. We've talked about it multiple times here. Zeri has a hard time actively being stopped, especially when you have a jungler who, I've talked about this multiple times on the channel, in Lee Sin, where you're really not going to be getting a lot of output from Lee Sin other than displacement in the late game. It's actually very difficult for someone like Lee Sin to deal with Zeri, because how does he even get on top of her? So it's very difficult for, I think, this comp to actively work in the way that it wanted to, but they played it so well that it didn't even matter. The Sivir got so far ahead. The Yuumi was always there to make sure that the Sivir was safe. Not only did she have Spell Shield, but the Yuumi was able to block stuff if needed, and you also have Gwen to help out with those invulnerabilities in team fights. Very, very fun to watch, and pretty much perfectly played from this FlyQuest team. It was a very close game for quite a while, but Johnson's team fighting was really what separated these two teams in the game. Big shout out to Takuya as well, who had a very underratedly good week as well. I think in the broadcast they gave him 2 of these player of the games. For me, Johnson was the star of the week, but Takuya was also phenomenal. Obviously, 2 games of LeBlanc before this. He goes to the slightly more meta assassin in this game in Ahri, and he pulls it off just as well. Maybe not quite as disruptive in the backline, but Ahri causes so much chaos. The charm can be such a difficult ability to actually have to deal with. And the macro sense that Takuya has makes it very difficult for this team. It very much stretches TSM out in a way that makes it very difficult for them to come together and actually have these 5v5 team fights that they probably wanted to have with an Azir, Zeri, Sejuani comp. So very, very well played from FlyQuest. Obviously, some macro mistakes made by TSM. We will get to that when we get to them. But overall, I think FlyQuest just played this game absolutely beautifully, especially near the end. And I'm very excited that they were able to pick up the win here. As for TSM, not the best game in the world. Obviously, they were in this. They absolutely had a chance, but some critical macro mistakes that they made really bumped down their chances. I think really the big fault here has to lie with the 3 players in the middle of the team sheet here. Spica, Maple, and Instinct, I think, all had opportunities to do something really good in this game. Not only was Spica basically a non-factor on this Rek'Sai. Obviously, Rek'Sai, a very early game pick. You have to get ahead on that champion. And Spica did have gold. He just wasn't able to do anything with it. You're supposed to turn a lead on Rek'Sai, especially into something like Lee Sin, into a big advantage for your team. But Spica just wasn't able to do that in this game. And I have to criticize Maple for some of these macro decisions. Late game, you cannot be teleporting out of a situation at a tower like that, and you also can't stay. Like, it just felt like every single time Maple had to make a decision here, he made the wrong one. And it very much cost his team. He was constantly going in for flashy ultimates here on the Azir, looking for the shuffles, when very much if he just stayed on the backline and tried to be that DPS that they needed, there was a much better chance that they have a shot in these team fights, but they just, he went for the macro plays and the big flashy plays, and it did not work out for him. He did have moments where he was super impressive, and honestly, a lot of the reason they were in this game at all was Maple, but he was quite frankly also the reason they were out of this game, so good and bad from him. And then Instinct making Zeri look balanced, not a very good game from him. Obviously, I've talked about it. If Sivir gets ahead, it can actually be very difficult for the Zeri to play the game because Sivir's damage is ludicrously high. She'll melt through your front line, which she absolutely did in this game, and then you just kind of have to run for your life. The damage output that Zeri can typically give you is just not going to be on the same level as a fed Sivir, and we saw that in this game. So even if I don't think Instinct played it awfully, the fact that he got behind on a champion that I think a lot of people consider to be incredibly overpowered in the meta right now, I think gives you all you need to know about what exactly happened in this game. But overall, outlook-wise, TSM has been locked in that 7 spot for quite a while. They're the best of the worst. So the number 1 team in the lower bracket, and they've been that for a while. Losing to FlyQuest isn't going to completely derail them, but there definitely are some question marks, most notably in the mid lane heading into playoffs. As for FlyQuest, they put themselves in a great position. Going 3-0 this week is about as perfect as you could ask for. Obviously, Cloud9's resurgence this week isn't ideal for them. They could have put themselves in a position where 5th place was easy as long as Cloud9 kind of played along with the script, but both of these teams had very good week 8s here. Day 3 was a little bit rough for Cloud9, but they played the best team in the league. What are you going to do? And it set up a very fun tiebreaker game at the end of the day. All FlyQuest has to do is win one more, and they put themselves in a very good position in playoffs. Moving on to Game 4 here in Day 3, and we've only got bangers left. We've got a matchup to determine 2nd place and the final bye in the first round of the playoffs. We had a matchup between Team Liquid and 100 Thieves, and congrats to 100 Thieves. They are able to pull off the comeback, and they are able to pick up a huge win to secure themselves a bye in the first round of the playoffs. They've got to love that. Obviously, not the perfect week from them. Dropping a game to FlyQuest earlier definitely put them in a little bit of trouble, but they're able to bounce back here, pick up a big win over TL, and set themselves up nicely. This was a very, very good win from them. Not only because of, beating TL was great, but how they did it I thought was very impressive. TL actually got out to a very early lead. A ton of gold got on Hansama's Sivir here. And that's dangerous, especially when you're playing into such a passive bot lane like the Senna Seraphine, at least in terms of the 2v2. That can be really dangerous. Sivir has the opportunity to typically just take over the game if you can force 5v5 team fights, but 100 Thieves keep fighting in these choke points. They keep getting good engages early in a fight. The TL isn't entirely connected. Sometimes Bwipo goes in too early. Sometimes Core goes in too early. Sometimes Core blows all of his summoner cooldowns on an immune someday, and you're just like, oh no, what's going on? And eventually, 100T gets to this point where the damage output that they're doing here from the Senna, from the Seraphine, from the Taliyah, hell, even the Gwen is just outpassing what Hansama can do because he can't step up. He can't actively be in this fight. The Wukong, the Seraphine, the Gwen are all major threats to be able to snipe him as soon as he steps out of position, and it was so fun to watch. This was one of the most fun games of the week, without a doubt. Great win from 100 Thieves. My player of the game is going to go to Huhi on the Seraphine. He was so good in this one. The amount of times that Seraphine ult just completely lost Team Liquid the fight was unbelievable. Seraphine can be such a dangerous pick, and hell, even TL knew that. Abadage joked earlier in the week that they were just going to pick Seraphine into Azir, and what were they going to do about it? TL blind picks the Azir, the Seraphine comes out, and then all of a sudden, this Seraphine is completely taking over team fights. Very, very difficult to play into. Sivir had to keep Spell Shield on cooldown because of that Seraphine ult. He couldn't actively play the game. He either had to position perfectly, or he had to blow it on the Seraphine ult, and then, oops, now you've got Senna coming in. Oops, now you've got Gwen and Wukong coming in. How do you avoid all this? You simply don't, and that was the beautifulness of the 100T comp. They were just able to do whatever they wanted as soon as they got an ounce of gold, and it was very fun to watch. They executed on it perfectly. Huhi wasn't the only one who played it great. FBI played a great game on Senna, pretty much always exactly where he needed to be. That champion can be a little bit weird to position on if you're not used to her. FBI did a great job of making sure to maintain pressure while also maintaining safety. That range can be a huge benefit. Someday does a great job of massive disruption and being, quite frankly, a huge target for this team to go after. Obviously, he can go invulnerable. He can go immune. So when he goes in, oops, all of a sudden you blow all your cooldowns on him and he's fine. He can come out. FBI still doing damage. Closer can go back in to re-engage and to cause so much panic for that TL team. Honestly, I just love what 100 Thieves were able to do this game. They drafted a great comp and then they executed on it. An absolute banger from them. As for TL, it's frustrating because they were in a place where they should have won this game. They had so much gold on the Sivir, but they just did not know how to play around that win condition, and it was so frustrating to watch. Hansama should have been the clear MVP of a winning game for TL here as they translated it into the late game, but they just weren't able to do it, and it was very frustrating to watch. Man, these team fights were unfortunate because it never felt like they were truly prepared for what came, even when they were the ones engaging, which honestly was quite frequently Bwipo on flanks with the Aatrox, Santorin chem tanking in on the Skarner, Core JJ trying to make a play on the Amumu. Even when they were the ones taking control and taking initiative, pushing forward, they weren't actively able to win because 100T had the perfect counterplay. Seraphine ult is really dangerous to a team that's running directly at you because all of a sudden you're a sitting duck. So man, if TL just played this a little bit different, we could be talking about a completely different story. We'd be playing another tiebreaker at the end of this week, one for second place, and that would be huge. But unfortunately, TL couldn't pull it together. In my opinion, it's nobody directly, it's not one person's fault that they lost this game. There were quite a few misplays that I've already named, but my dud of the game has to go to Bjergsen in the mid lane, who quite frankly should have been able to take over this game on the Azir, but the positioning was so poor. Azir does so poorly into Seraphine because if he does get hit by that R, he's just dead. He has no counterplay out of that. So very unfortunate from him, and he took the ego pick and it did not pay off. So Bjergsen's going to be my dud of the game here, but like I said, Misplays from Blippo, misplays from Core, misplays from Santorin. Really the only one who I thought played this game well was Hans, but unfortunately, even being a Fed Sivir, there's only so much you can do when the enemy team's throwing everything at you and you have no peel other than your one peel ability. So very unfortunate from TL that they weren't able to pull this out, but a very fun game from 100 Thieves. Outlook-wise, TL is now settled into third place. I don't think that that's the worst place they can be in. It means they play the worst of the upper bracket teams. Whoever loses the Cloud9 FlyQuest tiebreaker at the end of the day. It's not the worst place to be in, but obviously with this roster, you would have expected them to clearly be one of the top 2 teams in the region. They're going to need to pull a lot together in order to go into playoffs and be the team that everybody wants them to be. As for 100 Thieves, what a huge win. Obviously, not the perfect week. Losing to FlyQuest wasn't ideal, but the end result stays the same. You get your first round bye, and you get the opportunity to play the worst team, or a weakened team, a team that you've seen play in the playoffs already in that first round. You also give yourself a better shot in loser's bracket if you were to lose. Obviously, not that that's great, but 100T has just been really good all year. I think off the back of Someday, FBI, and Huhi, this team has really, really, really been good. They play really aggressive, they play fun, and they're great team fighters. I really want them to be able to maintain that. I am a little bit worried about some of the players on this team, but overall, this was a great showing, and I hope they can keep it up for playoffs. That brings us to our 5th and final game of the LCS kind of regular season. The main regular season tiebreakers not included. We have at least one. We could have 3 more if this game goes in a certain direction. We've got the battle for 8th place. Dignitas versus Golden Guardians. And I think fortunately, unfortunately for all of us, I don't know what to say. Golden Guardians picks up the win. No tiebreakers needed. Immortals and Dig have officially been eliminated with a Golden Guardians win, and they secure their spot in the 8th seed in the playoffs. Yay! This is their first win in almost 4 weeks, almost a month of action. They have not been able to win a game, and you know what? They finally take one against the worst team in the league, and that locks them for playoffs. That's what I like to see. On a brighter note, this game was awesome. This was an absolute banger. I mean, if this was not a battle between the 2 worst teams in a major region in any league in the world, I don't know what to tell you, because, oh man, the best way I can describe it, because I don't want to go too in-depth to a play-by-play, I think if you really are interested in just watching 2 bad teams try to out-lose each other, I highly recommend checking out this game, but if you don't have time, the main thing I will say is congrats to Golden Guardians. They are the first team ever to come up with the strategy of let's give away Elder and then immediately ace them for the win. Honestly, one of the most innovative strategies I have ever seen. Let's give away both Soul and Elder and then ace them for the win. They'll never see it coming. And I can tell you as a fan, I didn't see this coming. I thought Dignitas had this game in the bag, but unfortunately, Golden Guardians is able to pull out. Maybe fortunately, I didn't want to see more tiebreakers between these teams, but maybe fortunately, Golden Guardians is able to pull it out. A couple players played well on Golden Guardians. Not really a lot of consistency, but Stixay played well, positioned well on the Sivir, sometimes got caught out, but for the most part was good. Ole was good on the Lulu. I thought those 2 in the bot lane actually played well, but they also played against 2 good bot laners, and they all kind of went relatively even. The big star of the game has to be Licorice on this Jax. The redemption story. The king who sit atop his throne. He gets to play Hoon, which is a good final game of the season. Obviously, Licorice has certainly been struggling, to say the least, over the past few weeks, but pulls it back together and comes up in the clutch in a very crucial game for Golden Guardians here. He goes back to his more side lane, kind of macro pressure roots that I think he was really good on early in the year on picks like the Fiora. Goes back to that a little bit on the Jax and is able to take over the map and is able to really influence that last team fight. He's going to get my player of the game. A very good game from Licorice and a very needed game because I was really starting to get worried about him. He needs to get his confidence back, but he was a lot better, I think, in recent weeks than he has been, you know, over the course of maybe the last, 4 weeks, where he's quite frankly been maybe the worst player in the LCS, with the exception of Hoon. Shout out my boy Hoon. But, you know, shout out to Licorice, Stixay, Ole. They all played really well, and they were kind of the main conduits for making this victory work. And also, big shout out to River, because not only does he get traded away from Dignitas, but he is the one who seals their fate out of playoffs. You gotta love the storyline there. Moving over to Dignitas and what they were able to do. They were in this game. Honestly, they were in a better spot than Golden Guardians was, I think, for a majority of this game. Not only did they have Soul, not only did they have Elder, they just couldn't win a fight. You have an Aphelios with 6 kills, you can't win. With Alistar knockups, you have a fed Ahri in the mid lane. None of this is enough, and I don't even know how that's possible. I mean, shout out, like, I've never seen a team lose with this comp and those stats. Like, it actually is incredible that they somehow were able to lose this game, but at the end of the day, that's the Dignitas way. Obviously, there's some rumors of them wanting to sell their spot in the offseason. I don't know how true or false those rumors are, but if this is the last game that Dignitas has in the LCS, I mean, what a legacy to go. What a legacy to go out on. I honestly feel bad for some of these players. I really think Spawn is going to get screwed in this offseason. He's someone who I think, at least to me, has proven that he deserves to be in the LCS, but this guy's not going to get a spot on a team that isn't Dig, and I just simply don't think that Dig will want to keep him for next year. I think they're going to want to either upgrade their roster in multiple ways, or they're just going to want to go, sell their spot and not really care too much. I don't think Spawn is on this roster either way, and that's unfortunate. I also don't think Biofrost was all that bad this year. I don't think he was particularly great, but him and Spawn have a good chemistry, and I would really like to see them get more time in the LCS together. It just seems unlikely. And then Blue had a good game here, even if he had an awful split. It's good to see him go out on a high note, at least in a Dignitas uniform, but it was the rookies, it was the 2 newbies that came in and were really a problem, most notably Hoon in the top lane, who could have been the absolute hero in this final team fight on the Gwen. Gwen is such a monster in these choke point team fights, but he just wasn't able to bring it home. He dies so quickly in that fight, and then he's really never able to keep up with Licorice in a side lane at all on the Jax. He's going to get my dud of the game, unfortunately for him. Not a good week, not a good year from Hoon. Like I said earlier, he just wasn't ready for the LCS. It's not entirely his fault, but at the end of the day, I still have to grade him based on the performance he put out there on the Rift, which just wasn't very good in this game. XU was also a little bit of a problem, or at least at times he could have been a problem. Just getting overconfident, overcocky on the Wukong, going in and basically getting completely bursted down, getting Lissandra ulted, getting destroyed by the Sivir. There were multiple moments that the Wukong was just a little over-aggressive, but it happens. You gotta try to make plays on that champion, so I get it, but overall, Dignitas was not able to pull out the miracle victory, descended into a 3-way tie. So Dig is out. Golden Guardians are in playoffs. Unbelievable. What a fun final game of the regular season, although even though this is the last game, we have one more because we do have a tiebreaker series coming up after this. That's going to bring us to our tiebreaker game for 5th place in the LCS. Every other place has been determined. It is a big matchup here between Cloud9 and FlyQuest for 5th place. And C9 comes away with the win. A huge win here for Cloud9. They absolutely needed it. Whew, this was close, man. FlyQuest did a great job this week to put themselves in a position to even contest Cloud9, but whew, this game was not particularly close. A great game by Cloud9, a great draft by Cloud9. You have to give it to them here. Obviously, I'm not a huge fan of the Xin Zhao pick, but man, you put Xin Zhao with Zilean and Yuumi and give him Sivir, like, never mind, like, he's completely unstoppable, and Blabber really felt unstoppable in this game. This is the kind of comp I want to see C9 play, because this really enables the playstyle that they love. Obviously, Blabber is the heart and soul that this team runs through. He's going to be around every single play, and they're going to run through him. Everybody on C9 has talked about that. It's been very, very known. Why don't you actually just give him a go button? You just say, here's a Zilean, here's a Yuumi, Sivir, like, go in, and we will follow up. You give that to Blabber here with the Xin Zhao. You give him so many opportunities, and kablamo, like, he takes over the game. He's going to be my player of the game here. They gave him so many options, and he completely succeeded in all of them. The Zilean pick from Jensen, an absolute staple of Jensen's repertoire. Obviously, him and Bjerg are very well known for this pick, but holy crap, he pulled it off well. And this is the comp to use it in. This is a go button comp for Blabber, and it's perfect. Not only does it offer the speed up, but it also offers the revive. It can let him play super aggressive at the beginning of these team fights and give him the opportunity to come back and make sure that those, that you're not giving away. You can be that aggressive nature without giving away stuff absolutely for free. It makes the team fights very interesting and very difficult to deal with. We saw it with Fudge as well in the top lane, who played a great game on Gwen here, where it's like, how many times we actually have to kill Gwen. Not only can we not hit her half the time, but even if we do manage to kill her, she just comes back to life, and then she obliterates us because we're low health. I can't even imagine trying to be a backline threat, trying to deal with this, because the amount of engage that this team has basically for free is unbelievable, and that's all without even calculating the fact that Berserker on the Sivir is doing massive amounts of ricochet damage the entire time in the backline. An incredibly fun comp to watch play, and they really dominated on it. A great game from Cloud9. As for FlyQuest, a little bit deflating here of a loss. Obviously going 3-0 in the week is great to even put yourself in this position, but couldn't quite get it done in the tiebreaker. They fall to the number 6 seed, which isn't the worst. Obviously, Team Liquid isn't the most unbeatable threat in the world, but falling to 6 isn't quite as good as being number 5 here. And they just got outplayed. There's really no other way to put it. They got outdrafted for sure. This comp has so many problems. Twitch Lulu can be good into Sivir typically, but Yuumi does a really good job at negating a lot of what Twitch does, because Twitch needs to burst, and Yuumi can keep the Sivir alive for just long enough to get to the point where the Zilean can help, or the Xin Zhao can get on Twitch. Obviously, without ultimate, Twitch is super vulnerable to any kind of engage that Fudge or Blabber would have. So these extended engages that Zilean creates are honestly not good at all for FlyQuest. But then you look at something like a Jarvan. Jarvan could be really good because you can trap the engagers. You can keep them contained. So even if they do revive, you have them in front of you. But Jose Deodo was on complete autopilot this entire game. I'm not even sure what exactly was happening, but he was just watching the action like the rest of us here at home. It was kind of funny to watch. Not a good game from him. He's going to get my dud of the game here. The jungle matchup and the jungle difference, I really think, was the difference between a win and a loss here. Blabber was given all the resources, and Jose Deodo did nothing to stop him. Philip didn't play great here on the Kennen. Obviously, the Kennen engages could be good, but overall just weren't all that effective. The backline of C9 is basically irrelevant because it's just Sivir, and Sivir can spell shield herself, and then even then, like, Zilean can protect her relatively. Like, oh, you're going to blow up the Zilean. Like, no, you're not. You're just simply not going to do that. And the rest of the damage is all already on your backline. So the Kennen wasn't really actively doing all that much for FlyQuest. Unfortunately, this draft just got completely out of control, and Cloud9 basically played it perfectly. FlyQuest falling here. It's not the worst loss in the world. Obviously, this team can turn it around, but at the end of the day, they're going to be a little deflated that they couldn't walk out of here with the 5 seed after a pretty miracle week. But Cloud9's got to be elated. They go into playoffs with a huge momentum boost, and hopefully they use it. Blabber obviously has been a little up and down, especially recently, but this game proves that when you dump resources into him and you draft around him, he can still be one of the most devastating players in the LCS. Hopefully we get to see that a lot in the playoffs. All right, that is going to do it for my Week 8 LCS overview and analysis of all 16 games that we got in the week. A very fun, loaded, jam-packed week of LCS games that was a lot of fun to watch. Up on the screen right now, you are going to be seeing the updated standings and what is actually the playoff picture, as regular season in the LCS has come to a close and playoffs will be kicking off next weekend. I'm very excited. You can see up on the screen right now where all the teams are. The teams highlighted in blue have clinched a bye, you know, the 1-2 seeds, EG and 100 Thieves. 3 through 6 all play each other in the first round, and then of course losers bracket at 7 and 8. Poor Immortals and Dignitas sitting out at 9 and 10 respectively. Oh, it's been a fun season. Obviously, I hope you guys enjoyed the series. I've done a lot of these. In fact, the only one I missed for LCS was week 1. So I've been here the entire season, and you guys have too. I really hope you enjoyed along the way. These have been a lot of fun to make over the course of the year, and we're not done yet because playoff content is kicking off. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that bell. I usually am not the YouTube type of person to say that in these videos, but it really does help you guys get to this content and make sure you get to see the high quality content that comes out later this week, not only on the LCS, but on the LEC. We'll also be doing LCK and LPL playoff series reviews all month long. So I really hope you guys are excited for that. You'll notice on my standing screen, I should note, there are no power rankings, no changes. That's because all of that will be saved for the LCS playoff primer coming tomorrow. I hope you guys are excited for that. We put a lot of effort in those playoff primer videos, and I really hope you guys check it out if you like LCS content. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.